Wow, I don't think I've ever been more proud of having a degree from Brown University than I have today. This is a fantastic gathering. And to those lion dancers and those drums, as I mentioned as I came in, I'm from San Francisco, and you have got it. You're terrific. It's the best that I've heard. Now, it's also courageous in a way to bring in a even former president to address you. You know, we don't, with all due respect, we don't always have the best reputation. My wife likes to tell a story about a president who died and went to heaven and discovered that at the same time a pope had died. He also went to heaven, and then a world-known economist. And it was up to St. Peter to make sure that where they spent eternity should be chosen by him. And so first they found this fantastic mansion for the university president. And then they got this little shack for the Pope. And the businessman, the economist, he turns to St. Peter and says, I don't understand this. You give the Pope that shack and you give that college president this mansion? And St. Peter says, well, look now, it's all supply and demand. We've got 260 popes and we've only got one university president. Forgive you? I got to try another one. I was sitting at table with some marvelous people, and you had a couple that were thinking about going medical school and choosing between medical school and whether or not they should go on for a degree in biology or whatever. And there was a university president who, I don't know how this happened, but he ended up in hell, not in heaven. But what he discovered was he had a university down there, and it was a fantastic thing. I mean, he had this great office, a great secretary, the furnishings were terrific, and he finally goes up, he finds the devil, and he says, I don't understand. You know, I'm supposed to be in hell, not in heaven. And he says, you don't understand. Down here we have 2 medical schools. See, they don't laugh. You understand.
I get it.
Now, commencement, we are told, is meant to mark both an end and a beginning, and we've heard that here today as well. A joyous rite of passage where family and friends join with mentors and teachers to celebrate the academic success of those graduating and to encourage them to put their education to work to achieve both personal and civic goals. You've labored hard, or at least I think most of you have, to reach this high point in your lives, and therefore those who love and respect you are here to sing your praises, while they brought me in to deliver a challenge to perhaps even harass you a small amount. So the title I have chosen for these very brief remarks, Dare to be a Daniel, is also the title of a 1953 chapel address delivered by President Henry Wriston. Although he was the first president of Brown who was not also an ordained Baptist minister, he did do something, which was to maintain the required weekly chapel for all freshmen. Now, I used to try to get out of this because I was waiting on table at lunch, but when it was different speakers, when Wriston was speaking, I'd get somebody to take my tables and I'd be there. He was president from 1937 to 1955. He's often credited for initiating Brown's transformation from a small, primarily New England college to a highly ranked national university. He was president during a frightening period, however, in U.S. history, which included unprecedented attacks on universities and their faculty, orchestrated by the infamous U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy. Now, students who listened carefully to Wriston that day came away from chapel believing he had used his talk to send a strong message to the senator and his many supporters of the time. When other college presidents, and I'm embarrassed to tell you, including some from the Ivy League, were running for cover and giving in to the bullies, as Wriston called them, leading to the firing of faculty members for no less than exercising their constitutional rights to free speech. Many Brown students, myself included, were proud that day of our president, that chilly December day. But others, I'm sorry to say, were quite upset. In fact, one angry student actually followed Wriston from Sales Hall to his office in University Hall to argue with him about his talk. Unheard behavior in 1953, perhaps. I got to tell you, however, today it happens all the time. But the Daniel to whom Wriston refers in his speech is about an official in the Persian Empire, which was at that time ruled by King Darius. He responded, Daniel did, to a decree that came from Darius, that for 30 days no one was to offer prayer to any god or man except the king himself. Daniel responded by continuing to pray regularly to his God. And for that, he was thrown into the lion's den. He was expected he would not come out alive from the lion's den. But when it was discovered the next morning that he was alive and not been mauled by the lions, the king decided to let him out. Now, the notes for Wriston's speech, which are over here in the library, show him praising the biblical Daniel with phrases such as, he believed in something enough to risk his life. He saw what was wrong. He said what was wrong, and he took the consequences. Wriston then mentioned a series of outrageous actions associated with McCarthy, withheld his name, never mentioned McCarthy by name, but ended up with a courageous statement. Remember, this is less than a decade after the end of World War II. Ends up with a courageous statement: we should have learned by our experience with the Kaiser, with Hitler and the Japanese, that you cannot appease a bully. It is as true of freedom of speech or thought as it is of international affairs. Now, Edward R. Murrow has been given much credit for bringing down McCarthy, but he was not alone. He had our president who was willing to accept the consequences of his action, sitting by his side. For many of my generation, who as faculty or students who are active in the civil rights and anti-war movements, a progression from community action to university curricular reform, it was a natural one. Rejecting the view that higher education should serve a predominantly elite population, we chose to diversify the student body and to reform the university curriculum itself. Internally as well as externally, there was a heightened commitment at that time to the value of equity, of justice, and diversity, and a deeply rooted concern for reforming the very institution that had given us our edge, most of us first-time college degree students in our families. Our edge, the university itself. As we sought to open up the university to new ideas, it was a Brown president again by the name of Ray Hefner, who worked with a fellow by the name of Ira Maragzina to come up with new curricular strategies. Others of us are working on getting a larger proportion of underrepresented students into universities. Today, universities, major universities like Brown, recognize the importance of their students developing a keen social sense and a commitment to community. And it was yet another Brown president, Howard Schwerer, who in 1985 partnered with presidents of Georgetown and Stanford, along with the retired president of Indiana University, to create Campus Compact. Campus Compact was actually housed on this campus for many, many years. It enabled hundreds of thousands of students from around the nation to work in partnership with their local communities. Now, our democracy depends on the readiness of each new generation to take personal responsibility for the maintenance of the value system that characterizes our nation at its best. And since you are a very talented part of the newest generation, I suggest you get ready to take on the assignment. It's not an easy one. Judging from data in a poll conducted by the Harvard Institute of Politics that shows just 1 in 5 voters younger than 30 consider themselves to be politically engaged or active. And nearly 90% said they had never had attended a political rally or demonstration, and just 68% of them eligible to vote said they were registered for the last election. Only 68% said that they were registered to vote and that they would have voted, could vote in the when they could vote in the election. In addition, and I'm not going to dwell on this too much, in addition, we have the recently reported instances of bigotry and racism on more than a dozen major university campuses around the country, which has given significant rise to concerns from my generation about the moral and social values there might be out there. Who would have expected a half-century after the start of the civil rights movement, in which so many college students, yes, college students, and civil rights and faculty members engaged in bringing the revolution that came with the recognition of the importance of civil rights. If these fraternity and sorority members behave this way as students, then we will surely have to worry about the kind of citizens they will be after graduating. Starting with the widely circulated reports of racially offensive language, chants in a fraternity video at the University of Oklahoma, there have been stories published, at least to my knowledge, about 14 other colleges and universities. Now, there was another president here by the name of Vartan Gregorian. Happens to be a friend of mine. Vartan discovered a drunken student out there someplace yelling and screaming racial epithets, talking about gays this and gays that, and using the N-word. Vartan didn't wait on that one, like some presidents do now. Vartan threw him out of school because the people that he was denigrating were, in fact, fellow brown students, but I think he would have done it anyway. A recent study estimates that the non-white membership in majority white fraternities and sororities is between 3 and 4%, which might help in part to explain the problem. But one important way to change the campus culture is to increase the impact of minority faculty, which is exactly what President Paxson proposes in her plan to double the number of underrepresented faculty by the year 2025. Now, I've traveled 3,000 miles in 58 years, if you count, to challenge the class of 2015 as you exit Brown, just as Wriston did to the class of 1957 as it entered. In doing so, I ask you accept the charge of the great Jesuit teacher, Pedro Arrupe, to become, and I quote him, agents of change in society, not merely resisting unjust structures and arrangements, but actively undertaking to reform them, and becoming a force for good in a nation that is increasingly insensitive to the needs of the less fortunate. I'll quote him again, "Let there be men and women who will bend their energies not to strengthen positions of privilege, but reduce privilege in favor of the underprivileged." Well, Father Arrupe argues for a moral and social imperative that we should all embrace, the building of a world in which we would all like to live. Now, I don't want to rain on your parade, but unfortunately, the world we read about in the newspapers every day does not seem to meet that goal. Members of learned professions who spell out the conditions under which torture can legally take place and methods to be used. well-connected men and women who lobby key legislators to amend federal law to greatly benefit the wealthy at the expense of the poor. Corporations which outsource both jobs and profits to avoid paying U.S. taxes and decent wages for American workers. Corporate boards, and I have to put on my glasses for this, I'm sorry, but corporate boards who right now, on the average, are paying the CEOs 373 times what the average worker in that corporation makes, 373% more. Real estate interests that replace middle class and workforce housing with high-priced rentals and expensive private homes. Law enforcement agencies that fail to protect the most vulnerable of our citizens. Drug companies and their investors who reap huge profits as the ill amongst us sicken and die. Federal employees who turn their backs on the brave men and women who have fought and died for their country. Bigots who bring shame to the very religious institutions they claim to cherish. So-called public universities that can no longer provide a high-quality, low-fee education to deserving students. And those who misinterpret the Second Amendment and refuse to accept responsibility for the deaths of so many innocent Americans. I could go out at length, and I'm not going to. Instead, however, we would urge you to follow St. Paul's admonition that you not allow yourself to be overcome by the evil, but rather overcome evil with good by working to bring about the ethical and humane reforms that are so necessary. Now, I appreciate that life is difficult for many of you. Skyrocketing education costs, an enormous loan burden for many of you, a job market that looks bleak, and housing costs that continue to increase. That makes my challenge even more difficult to meet. And I don't wish to sound unsympathetic, but you do have choices, real choices. You can be angry, despondent, selfish, uncaring, even greedy, focused only on your own welfare. Or you can take on this civic challenge eagerly and use all that you have learned to address the great needs of your local community, your state, perhaps this nation, and maybe for some of you, the world itself. I believe you will not be discouraged by the seriousness of the problems we face or be afraid of change, but rather be energized by the challenges, recalling the words of Luke, to whom much has been given, much is expected. Now, one of the most significant challenges our nation faces is the restoration of civility, a word that comes from the Latin civis, meaning pertaining to citizenship. Currently, we tend to define civility as courtesy and good manners, but to the theologian Harvey Cox, it was the need, we need to restore the original sense, which is based on the participation of citizens in a society in which the language is reasoned, debate, and exchanged about public issues. And that language is based on the values they hold important. Now, among the values that you and I hope, hold important are maintaining mutual respect, a willingness to speak frankly and listen wholeheartedly to each other, and a genuine appreciation for diversity. And as Americans, we cherish the right of free assembly, honor to a fault the guarantee of freedom of speech, honor and respect, and encourage dissent and independent thinking, welcome unpopular and challenging ideas, keeping to reasoned debate as Cox challenges. It is not enough to practice civility in its broadest sense while staying out of the fray when others violate our cherished values. So you have a lot of work to do. I'm not asking but challenging you to help make our nation and the world fairer, more ethical, and more peaceful. That you join with others in promoting and sustaining the values of a healthy world culture with concern for human rights and for our environment, appreciation and respect for cultural and ethnic diversity, recognizing that higher education is a path not only to personal fulfillment, but to achieving social justice and equity. In the words of a friend of mine, the Reverend Cecil Williams, we work, and I quote, to find ways to bring justice and mercy and love and righteousness and compassion. We move then in the world to bring deliverance, liberation to the oppressed, the poor, the forgotten, the alienated, the abandoned. Now, sharing this celebration with you this weekend are the women and men who have guided you on this journey, the faculty. They've helped you to acquire habits of mind, ways of thinking, analyzing, weighing, and deciding. These are the tools that will enable you to deal with the complex issues facing our world. At Brown, you have learned to deal with the ambiguity and the contradictions, to evaluate competing arguments and perspectives so that you'll not have to fall back on the comfort and the distortion of a simplistic view. Think about making the courageous Rosa Parks your role model, a woman who demonstrated something enormously hopeful and extraordinary, exciting as she refused to move back to the body, exciting, all of us, I remember this so well, as she refused to move to the back of the bus. Here was the power of the passionate individual, motivated by principle and driven by equal parts of dissatisfaction and idealism. She said later she wasn't trying to make a big fuss about anything. She was just sick and tired of having to put up with it. Observing her, we learned that one person can make a difference, can in fact reshape a world. That person could be one of you if you're ready to take the risk and dare to be a Daniel. Tomorrow you will graduate and find yourselves living in a world of extraordinary challenges, which I am sure your president and faculty are confident that you will meet. The goal of the American university, the modern American university, should be the education of free and creative men and women, enabled to act with moral conviction, inspired to think critically, and to live generously. If that does not describe each of you, then Brown University has failed to do its job. But I don't believe that for a moment. Let me conclude by quoting President Wriston's final words in the chapel speech that so impressed me. Quote, "College is a place to grow up, to learn from books, to improve the mind, to acquire some social grace. But it is wasted if you do not grow up morally and are not ready to take a position and stand to it, whatever may befall." Thus spoke the man of courage who is willing to risk the lion's den. Now, having finished with my exhortation, I can now join with the thousands who are here today and tomorrow in congratulating you and personally wishing you joy and success in the years ahead. I thank you, and God bless you all.